Everybody deals with grief differently, right? Some people fuck at funerals. I cut off heads.
No More Heroes 2 Desperate Struggle. If I'm honest, I almost feel bad making a flaws of video on this title because quite frankly I dig the hell out of it. Quirky personality, style, a sublime soundtrack. You'd think Travis Touchdown's second murderous rampage through Santa Destroy would be right up there with the original No More Heroes Assassination Mayhem. But alas, 'tis not the case.
You gotta be kidding!
The issues I have with No More Heroes 2 in comparison to the first game are a little hard to itemize though, because considering this is a Suda51 game, who's to say which questionable design decisions were unintentional and which were maybe done on purpose in twee attempts to be self-referential or to mock the conventions of the previous title. So take this video with a grain of salt. The No More Heroes series doesn't take itself seriously, so there's no need to get up in arms about some odd design choices its still pretty damn enjoyable sequel brings to the forefront. So let the bloodshed begin. As per usual, expect spoilers for both games from this point forward. Now, where best to start this than to check the game's very own box? Well, look at that, 50 whole assassins. Incorrect.
Shut up!
The original title had 10 boss fights, so I'm pretty sure most of us were pretty skeptical when it was announced the sequel would have 50. Of course, most of us assumed Suda would probably just find some way to cram about half of them into one fight to lower dev time, but that we'd still get to technically fight 50 people. Nope, still incorrect. Henry kills 3 of them off screen, and while you could make the excuse that Skelter Helter, Kimmy, and Mimi make up for that, there's no excusing Dr. Let's Shake killing off about 12 of them in the contrived Battle Royale event. So no, there aren't 50 assassins in the game, Suda, you dumb poodaroos. Playing fast and loose with the ranking system really makes the whole setup feel rather meaningless this time around. Originally, getting a rank was something the player felt they worked hard for and earned. After grinding for cash by doing odd jobs and side missions, upgrading Travis's equipment and skills, fighting through an intense level, having that tension-building phone call, and then finally taking on the boss, getting that rank felt like something was really accomplished. This time around, the rank count just jumps all over the place whenever the story pleases, so that compelling sense of progression is kind of lost. There are 15 fights, so instead of playing around with this 50 assassins trick, why not just have 15 ranks? Now, if there were 50 assassins to fight, then maybe I would excuse my next complaint. The fact that the pre-boss fight cutscenes felt quite lacking in comparison to the first game. In the first game, the pre-boss fight cutscenes were usually pretty extensive.
Yeah, what is it, Mr. Cosplay?
And always managed to at least give the player some idea of who they were facing and what their personalities were. No More Heroes 2 is all over the place though. Sometimes a baddie will get to talk to Travis, and on other occasions the match will just start up with barely a word spoken. This guy, for example, doesn't even get his own theme tune. Ouch. Overall, there's been quite the shift in tone and writing style from the original game to Desperate Struggle. In the first title, Travis wasn't depicted as a cool guy. He was a whack-job loser jerk who was trying his best to act cool in a dingy underbelly of a world in which he was clearly in over his head. In the second game though, Travis is attracting pretty women, is a legend to all he meets, and generally gets to strut around being nowhere near as ditzy and clumsy as he was originally. It feels like the writers became fans of Travis themselves and started portraying him as authentically cool instead of somebody trying really hard to be.
What? A fan? Of me?
To the point where halfway through the game, he starts to gain a sort of conscience, rejecting how vicious the killing has gotten. And you know, maybe that's okay. This is the sequel after all. Travis is more experienced, and I'm sure a lot of fans are happy to see him kicking ass with more style. But I can't help but feel like Travis lost a bit of what made him such a fun and original character. His dialogue in the second game is rather predictable. He swears and spouts lewd things, but you can kind of see them coming a mile away.
You're lucky I don't have a bondage kick.
In the first game, you had no idea what kind of things Travis would say, and the way his crazy, unpredictable dialogue bounced off his foes made for some unforgettable exchanges.
If challenge had a taste, you'd be quite delicious.
I don't remember anything in No More Heroes 2 being anywhere near as memorable as, say, the Destroy Man cutscene in the original, who, by the way, they bring back for a cameo boss fight where, of course, he's going to make nowhere near the same impact, just being regurgitated again with a new gimmick. No More Heroes 2 is also a lot more crazy. I know we all probably remember the first title being quite over the top, but despite some of its lunacy, it had a more grounded approach that allowed a lot of the confrontations to feel much more meaningful. While in the second game... You get the sense they were trying to top themselves and how wacky things could get and pushed it just a little too far. The first game was a title satirizing stuff like anime by applying its tropes to a gritty, disturbing world, while 2 just is an anime. 2 is a cartoon with absolutely zero ground in reality, while 1 lies somewhere in between, which creates a much more uncanny and interesting world. But enough of all my precious universe stuff. How does the gameplay fare in the sequel? Well, honestly, I feel like it was also hit with a bit of a downgrade. I don't know whether it's because of the new engine implemented, but the combat feels a lot more rigid now. It's hard to really put into words how Travis's movement just used to flow a hell of a lot better in the previous title. Some of these changes I can delineate though, like how the movement from the high stance to the low stance is a lot less natural, even lacking the original's indicator that made it much easier to tell which move the player was about to execute. The indicator may not have made sense if the player chooses to play with the classic controller that's now supported, but come on, who doesn't want to play No More Heroes with the Wiimote and nunchuck? Another puzzling omission is the removal of camera control with the D-pad. It used to be a pretty effective way to gauge your surroundings in the middle of combat, but now it's simply not an option for some reason. Which makes little sense when you take into account you can actually move the camera in the bathrooms where it's totally necessary. I also can't help but feel No More Heroes 2 is way too happy to stun or knock Travis to the ground. Yeah, a player's got to be punished for being hit, but getting knocked down to the floor every 5 seconds really takes one out of the action, and in the first game it was nowhere near this frequent.
I guess you got a point there.
I've also got to take issue with some of the new enemy types. Man, there's a lot of fat guys now. And of course, since this is a video game, being fat automatically means your life bar gets quite the boost. There's nothing significantly challenging about fighting these guys. They're just tedious to whittle away at and just serve as a way to artificially lengthen some of the combat sequences, which you think wouldn't be necessary considering the fetish the second game has for enemy waves. In the later levels of the game, the number of enemies that roll on into the stage just gets ridiculous. No More Heroes combat isn't especially deep or challenging, so there comes a point where sticking Travis in one room and flooding it with hundreds of enemies just gets boring. There's the addition of an ecstasy gauge that lets Travis activate a super powered up mode, but you can get it so quickly and often that it makes the game way too easy and lessens the impact landing a slot machine power up used to have. There are some other minor changes here and there. The lock-on no longer counts the amount of hits you've landed on an enemy, for example. I will commend the game for adding some neat features like switching katanas mid-gameplay, but overall I much prefer how Travis handled in the first title. The boss fights also have their ups and downs in the gameplay department. Thankfully, they're much less likely to use the I don't feel like getting hit at the moment iron block tactics some of the bosses in the first game had, but as a result attacking them tends to be a lot less strategic. Originally, No More Heroes boss fights had a bit of a keep away element to them, but head-on tactics are much easier to rely on in the sequel. Other playable characters have been added to the mix, and while playing as Henry can be pretty cool thanks to his fast pace, playing as Shinobu is a little less than stellar. She's not awful to play as, but her moves lack punch compared to Travis, and the decision to force the player into clumsy rigid platforming sections as her do these stages no favors. While Henry only gets one boss fight, Shinobu gets 2 whole levels that the player is rather awkwardly forced to do back to back, substantially breaking up the game's pacing. Side note, if you thought the platforming was bad by itself, wait until you have to do it while fighting a boss whose main tactic is stun locking Shinobu every time you get close to him. Many have complained about the final boss fight being really lame, and while I can concede that gameplay wise it's weak, this is one case where I can kind of get behind Desperate Struggle's lunacy.
You gotta be shitting me!
Travis's attempts at revenge are about the only thing taken seriously in this game, and the fact that it all culminates with him fighting a giant balloon of a short guy in a superhero costume is pretty damn hilarious. Sure, it's a pity there isn't some insanely climactic one-on-one sword fight with a character like Henry akin to the first game, but there's no way it could have topped that anyway. So having Travis fight the most ridiculous thing in the entire series while rocking out to the raddest track the title has to offer is pretty awesome in its own right. I mean, if you want to talk silly, how about the second game completely dropping the first title's major twist, involving Sylvie's assassin organization all being a made-up con? That was all quickly forgotten in favor of regurgitating the same setup again. Something that was changed slightly though was the art style. Again, while I do like No More Heroes 2's new aesthetic, the characters definitely appear a lot more cartoony, lacking the harsh shadows and edgier look the original title had. But hey, now I'm just getting down to preferential stuff, and I like to keep these types of videos as objective as possible.
Such a gentleman.
I guess before I go, I should mention that No More Heroes 2 doesn't have an overworld anymore. Now, was the first game's overworld perfect? Definitely not. But I don't see why it couldn't have been improved. Biking around Santa Destroy still felt like a fairly intrinsic aspect of No More Heroes, so having it removed for convenience doesn't feel like a flaw as much as just kind of a cop-out.
Damn, what was I thinking?
Whether you had the same problems I had with No More Heroes 2 or not, I myself still had a blast playing both titles. They're creative, exciting, funny, and as Suda51 himself would put it, pretty bloody refreshing. Despite the second game's problems, I probably won't be seeking the exit anytime soon.
And that's a wrap.